If you haven't heard, in the past couple weeks, the channel Linus Tech Tips has been uploading videos that are a part of a sort of challenge series where Linus and Luke try to replace their Windows install on their daily driver machine with some distro of Linux. And, as expected, it hasn't been the comfiest of rides for them, but Linus in particular hasn't had the best of times. Now, this is going to be my personal response to this challenge, and though they are only 3 videos, as of the time of writing, into what is supposed to be a 5 or 6 part series, I still think what I'm about to say won't change. So, let me get right into it and just say they're going about it all wrong. You're probably slightly confused as to what I mean, but let me explain. GNU/Linux as an operating system should not be thought of as an alternative or a decently viable replacement for Windows. They are totally different systems built by different people for different purposes. The Windows operating system has an everyday computer user at the centre of their marketing and development strategy. I mean, just look at their market share and the total users of the operating system. If you are moving over to Linux from Windows, you should not be looking for a Windows-esque experience, but a whole different perspective on how a computer is used. Using Linux is a learning exercise and should be treated as such. I personally use Linux on my main machine, not only because I support free and open source software, but also because I wanted to learn Linux and change my perspective on how I use my computer altogether. I think this is what most of the people who want to hop over to using Linux on their daily driver misunderstand. You have to change your mindset about using a computer. But I digress. The Linux challenge Linus and Luke have undertaken has certainly drawn more attention to GNU/Linux from the masses, as well as drawn light to some of the issues many self-described beginner Linux distros have when beginners and normies alike really try and use them day to day as their primary operating system. One of the main issues that has been brought into the light by Luke and Linus is the lack of an all-encompassing user interface. Different parts of the system are often developed by different developers and therefore may have glitches and or errors when the user tries to make the two interact. These types of small and GUI specific issues simply do not affect the settled down power users that make up the Linux elite. And all of these issues together create an environment where many Linux beginners might find themselves struggling to complete a task and being told by power users online that it isn't an issue and that they should just use the terminal instead. And can you really blame them? After all of the core aspects of Linux were built with server users in mind. And it is true that once you reach a certain point using Linux for a long enough period for a variety of tasks, it can be much easier to just use the terminal and avoid the ever-increasing bloat and error-prone desktop environments that ship with today's distros. Alright, but what if you're a Linux beginner and you're struggling with completing a task? Let me give you a tip. RTFM. So, what does that mean? If you haven't figured it out by now, let me tell you. RTFM is an acronym for, and excuse the language, read the fucking manual. How do I do that, you say? Well, in Linux there is a specific command for this, and that command is known as the man command. Now, if you want to know the different subcommands for a specific keyword or are unsure of what you can do with it, all you have to do is enter the word man before the command. An example would be man pacman, pacman being the package manager for Arch and Arch based distros. So just a quick tip there. But back on topic. The Linus and Linux challenge. Linus originally chose Pop! OS as his distro of choice, whereas Luke, being the sensible and reasonable man he is, chose Linux Mint. Now, I'm not knocking either of these distros. Each have their own positives and negatives, and I have personally used both of them as my daily driver at one point in time or the other. But I will give you my personal opinion on them, and why the result for Linus and Pop! OS went as bad as it did. First of all, both of these distros refer to themselves as a, quote, beginner-friendly distro. However, using Linux as a daily driver for more than basic web browsing, I mean, you're just going to run into issues at some point regardless, and I was surprised by how much of an issue Pop! OS was right away. Again, if you haven't watched the video, do check it out after this one, but in short, Linus was trying to install Steam, and Pop! OS took that as a sign to delete its desktop environment. And Linus being Linus, not being able to read, a long-term Windows user, followed the process to enable Pop! OS to do just that. Now, I'm not excusing Pop! OS. I myself know how much of a pain Pop! OS can be, and in the end, I also abandoned ship and swam over to Manjaro. There you go. So much for Pop! OS being beginner-friendly. But let's not forget, it is only a couple years old, and has a long way to go. But at the same time, because of that, it shouldn't be considered bulletproof beginner-friendly in any capacity. Just because it comes preloaded with NVIDIA drivers and a cool base GNOME desktop window tiling manager hybrid and gaming plastered on the website doesn't excuse the apparent oversight when it comes to basic installation tasks for programs, and the apparent bugs that come with it. Linux Mint was a far better experience for Luke, in the sense that it didn't brick itself. And just FYI, Luke has said at the beginning of this challenge that he does have past Linux experience, so that has definitely helped him in using Linux in a decent capacity and getting along with it quite nicely. So where was I? Yes, Linux is not meant to be beginner friendly. It's a learning exercise or a tool for the professionals who need it. I'm sorry I keep banging on about it, but I think it needs to be said to people. And I think this challenge it's a good challenge, and it draws attention to Linux, which is ultimately a good thing. I don't want people going into it with the wrong mindset and being disappointed and then going back to Windows with the impression that Linux is just useless, because it's really not. And it's a really good tool for the people who know how to use it. It's not a replacement for people who simply want to use their machine with no fuss. You'll be hard pressed to find that anywhere, but if you are seriously looking for that, I have a suggestion. Just use Windows 10 Long-Term Support Edition. It's Windows 10 without the big bits of annoying junk Microsoft force into regular Windows 10. It's a win-win. So, all in all, Linux shouldn't be considered a Windows alternative. It should be seen as a whole different way of using a computer, with the opportunity to do whatever you want with it, as long as you have the know-how and the patience. If you're looking for a simple operating system to browse the internet and nothing more, get a Chromebook or something. If you use Linux, expect resistance and being forced to learn solutions to problems you've never thought about. Yes, I do know the irony of Chrome OS being based on Linux. Well, that's about it. Please subscribe if you enjoyed Linux content. Well, that's about it. Please subscribe if you enjoy Linux content, and like the video if you enjoyed it. And if I'm wrong about absolutely everything, tell me in the comments. I'd love to have a discussion about it. Have a good day, everyone, and stay safe.